Hey knitters, magic loop. If those words made you cringe because you have tried doing magic loop in the past and it didn't go so well, or if you're a beginner looking to step up your skills, give this episode a watch. I'm going to do my very best to help you be successful with this technique. Hey there, yarn crazies. Today I'm going to demonstrate magic loop for you the same way I do for customers at the shop. I was taught how to do magic loop by Vicky, who is the owner of Grandma's Spinning Wheel. So I personally have never watched any of the basic how-to videos running around out there already. Now obviously some of those videos work great for some folks, but apparently not so great for others based on feedback I've heard over the years. A number of students and customers have poked at me over the past few months about making a video on this topic myself, so I'm going to give it a go. I want to clarify that we are talking about magic loop today, not magic circle. There is a crochet technique called magic circle or the magic ring that has to do with starting a crochet project in the round without a hole in the middle of the fabric, and is frequently seen in amigurumi projects and top-down hat patterns. If you are a bistitual like me and you have had trouble with that technique, I'll be doing a video on that one soon as well. On to a magic loop. These days there are several options for knitting in the round on smaller diameter projects. And if you want to learn more about your other options outside of magic loop and why I personally consider double pointed needles or DPNs kind of a last resort, go check out episode 11 where I review twist short combos by Gu and I discuss some of the pros and cons of the various other methods and tools out there. And that brings me to step one to achieving success with magic loop, choosing the right tool for the job. If you have tried, I don't have them with me. If you have tried magic loop in the past and went poorly, it may not have been you. It may have been your needles. Trying to do the magic loop with stiff, unforgiving plastic cables is a potential hazard to your mental health and possibly the physical health of anyone who happens to come within throwing or maybe stabbing range of you and your project. Memory-free cables sold by brands like Gu and Collage are going to be your most stress-free options, and longer lengths of softer plastic cables like the Carbons from Knitter's Pride or the Clover Bamboo Circulars with the hollow tube-style cables will work too. Step two is to choose the right length of needle for your project. My preferred length of needle for socks is 32 inches for a single sock or 40 to 47 inches for two at a time. Yes, folks, you heard that right. 2 socks at the same time on a single needle. How's that for efficiency? More on that later. The point is that you want plenty of extra cable for magic loop. Step 3 is to cast on the appropriate number of stitches, join them in the round, and being careful not to twist your cast on. I'm going to switch over to hands-on view now and show you how to start this process. First, here's my cast on. Divide your cast on stitches into 2 equal halves. In this case, I have 28 stitches, so there will be 2 groups of 14. Once you have them divided, pull the cable out between the 2 halves, leaving yourself a big loop and all of the stitches on one of your 2 needles. Okay, confession time. I used to absolutely dread the first row of projects like this. It seemed like no matter how careful I thought I was being, my cast on would be twisted by the time I got to the end of my first row and I'd have to rip it out and start all over. Desperation and frustration drove me to try, of all things, a sewing technique called basting. I realized I could baste my edges together. If you aren't familiar with the term, a basting line is a loose line of stitches that are used to create gathers or keep pieces of fabric in proper alignment with each other while you do something else like special hem treatments and such. I discovered that if I lined up the bottom edges of my cast on after splitting them onto the two needles, a piece of contrasting colored yarn can be used to make the edges stay put. I like to tie one end of my basting line to a locking stitch marker. That makes it easy to keep in place. These nifty wool needles make this part a lot easier because you don't have a lot of room to work here, and large yarn needles like most people use won't really work. When you do this part, try not to pull the yarn too tight, but don't let it be so loose that it defeats the purpose. Aim for that happy middle of the road tension. By the way, if you can't find these wool needles locally, Grandma's has these on the website, and I'll put a link to both brands that we carry in the show notes down below. They are about $3 for a package of 3, so they're a really great value. Keep stitching back and forth until you reach the end, and then I like to go backwards a few times to keep it from working loose. Ta-da! No twisted cast on. We now have a stable foundation to build on. Time to rock on with the first row of magic loop. Okay, here's how to do your first row of magic loop. Making sure that your working yarn is coming off of the stitches in the back and is here in between the two needles. Give it a little tug, make sure that loop is nicely sized around that needle. You're going to pull your back needle out, leaving the back half of the stitches parked on the cable back there. You'll know you've pulled out the appropriate amount of cable when you look at it, it's like big floppy dog ears. I think of these as floppy, Cocker Spaniel ears, those adorable drapey long ears. Now, the free needle is going to act as your right hand needle, and you're going to form your first stitch. When you pull it off, you're going to give that a tug. Tighten it up. Now you're just going to work your first half of your stitches as you normally would. It doesn't matter if you're a picker or a thrower. I'm assuming that even for Portuguese knitters, this would look about the same. Now, we've just completed the first half of our stitches. Now what do? We turn everything. Make sure your yarn's in the back there. Now we reposition the tips. We push this one into this half of the stitches. Give that back one a tug. And just as last time, we pull back needle out. Make sure we've got our big matching loops there. And now we do the second half of our stitches. I kind of like the basted together edges because in addition to keeping my cast on from twisting at all, no possibility of that, while I'm doing the first row, it also feels like it just creates a little more material to hold on to. And because I'm not worried about my cast on twisting, I can concentrate on other things. There's our last stitch right there. Ta-da! First row done. Now, return the work. Make sure the working yarn's in proper position. We push the free needle into these stitches here in the front, what is now the front, and we get ready to go again. Pull out that back. Oops. Now This shows part of why you need such a nice long needle for doing socks. The longer your needle, the less pull you actually have, or less tension and pull you have between the two halves of your stitches here at these splits. So tightening up this stitch, or making sure it's nice and tight before you pull the back needle out, and tugging the first stitch on this side completed down tight after you pull this out also helps avoid laddering. Helps avoid laddering at both sides. You want to make sure you do not tug on this stitch after you've pulled this tip out, or it's going to make it too tight and too tiny, and it's going to give you trouble when you get to that point. We'll do one more row here. You got to the end of that half of the stitches. Turn your work, and you can push, or you can use the cable and pull. Just be really, really careful. You make sure you're pulling the right one. Yes, I have more than once, without paying attention, pulled on a cable really hard and had all my stitches come flying off the tip. So I find the pushing the needle tip in a little more reliable than pulling. Pull that back needle out, about the same amount of loop on each side, and we're completing the other half of our stitches. Ta-da! Put this in here. Move this out of the way. And now you can see we're back at what I consider the starting point, or point 0, ready to do another row. You can take this basting line out now, or a few rows from now, or you can leave it in the entire project. It's entirely up to you. That's the basic nuts and bolts of Magic Loop. It feels a little awkward at first, but once you get in the rhythm, you just might find yourself zooming around and around and around. Speaking of which, here's another frustration reducer for you. Mark the first stitch of your row by putting a locking stitch marker around one of the legs of the stitch and move it up every few rows. Something else I have noticed over the years is that I have a harder time getting a good tension on the first stitch of a set if it is a purl stitch. I sometimes see a bit of laddering and it really bugs me. To combat that, I will shift my split between the two halves by a stitch or two, or just have more stitches on one side than the other if it means I am always starting on another needle with a knit instead of a purl. It's not always possible when you're working with a complex stitch pattern, but I've tried it many times. It works really well, and I tend to do it whenever I really can. One of the things I love about this technique is the peace of mind that comes when you stuff your project into a bag and go. You pull the needles through the loops and away you go. No losing a DPN, no drop stitches from the multiple needle intersections. Another great thing about this technique is how much help it can be with things like hats. You can do the entire hat on a single long needle, decrease rows and all, or you can do the brim and the body of a hat on a much shorter needle and then switch to a longer needle to Magic Loop the decreases at the top. Or if you are using interchangeables, you can simply change to a longer cable when the time comes to do the decreases at the top. I've done all three and they all work really well. If you're like me and get second sock syndrome really bad, yes, You can do 2 socks or sleeves at a time on a single needle. I don't really care if these aren't a perfect match, so I'm just pulling from both sides of the ball. If you currently have a project on double pointed needles and want to migrate it over to Magic Loop, that would be a really great way to start getting used to this technique without having to fuss with the cast on right at first. Just make sure that if you are working with, say wood or bamboo or metal, that you transfer to the same type of needle. Do not change the material, it will change your gauge. If you want to get started with Magic Loop but don't want to try it on fingering weight socks right at first, you might grab some heavier weight yarn from your stash and give one of these following patterns a try. These are the Easy Peasy socks for first timers, which use worsted weight. Or maybe the DK weight vanilla socks, which are just what the name says. Or for something not sock, the really adorable Berry Baby hat, which also uses worsted weight and looks super cute in a variety of colors. All 3 of these patterns are free Ravelry downloads and each has thousands of completed projects, so it's a pretty safe bet that they are all well written and pretty easy to follow. I'd really love to hear from any of you who found this video helpful, and I certainly hope that you'll consider trying Magic Loop either for the first time if you're a beginner, or try it again if it frustrated you to the point of giving up in the past. If you want more great video content on this subject, I recommend checking out Sheepishly Sharing's video titled Troubleshoot Magic Loop. I ran across it a few years ago and I really enjoyed watching it. Thanks for watching today. If there is a yarn you'd like to see me review or a technique you've had trouble with and want me to make a tutorial on it showing how I teach it, please let me know in the comments or via email or Instagram message. Next episode will be a review of Sugarcane by Circulo, a super yummy hot weather friendly viscose. If it's summer for you right now too, please stay hydrated. And maybe take some time to check on any elderly neighbors you have, because this time of year can be especially hard on them. And as always, remember to take time to make things that make you happy, and I'll see you next time.